So, the greatest hits of Christianity. What are the things I love most about Christianity? Well, first and foremost, I love how Christianity was essentially the first major hippie movement that called for peace and inclusivity and loving enemies. Like that revolutionized the world. And sure, you can find individuals and little pockets of ancient people who thought we should challenge hate with love. I mean, Buddha taught a lot of similar things as Jesus, but Christianity was the first mass movement of people welcoming in others that they had previously hated, and even laying down their lives by the thousands because they'd rather show people love than to fight back and defend themselves or defend their rights or whatever. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's no record of any Christian killing anyone for any reason until like the fourth century. And I heard this from Sam Harris of all people, but Christianity basically bankrupted the Roman military because there was so much peace. The Pax Romana and Christians wouldn't fight for the empire, so they had to hire in all these mercenaries and barbarians who played a big role in the downfall of the Roman Empire. So that's pretty awesome. And imagine where Christianity would have gone if it never got mixed up with Constantine or the Crusades or, violence and warfare and things like that. I also love that Jesus and the apostles didn't stand to gain wealth or women or land or fame, but pretty much the opposite, like persecution, poverty, obscurity, and extremely painful deaths. Because most major religions, or at least the religious figures, like including ones from the Old Testament, they got a lot of money and wives and political power and things like that. But Jesus and most of the 12 apostles died brutal deaths, getting boiled alive or sawn in half or wild stuff like that. Like in this little mountain town in the Dolomites we went to, I once visited this church where they had statues of all the apostles. And each of the apostles were holding the weapon or instrument that they were killed with, like they were trophies. And I thought, holy shit, that's metal. Like one of them was holding, the saw that he was cut in half with, just like, check it out, like a fish. And so I've got all my doubts and questions, but the fact that so many Christians were so committed to this way of love and self-sacrifice, like always makes me stop for a minute and wonder, because sure, you could argue that an ego trip of being seen as a prophet or like a holy man was these people's motives, but they sure as hell believed it to the bitter end. And one of my other favorite parts about Christianity is how it's an entire religion that revolves around the least of these, women, minorities, social outcasts, the forgotten. It's the story of the perspective, of the little guy and the underdog. And that was actually one of the biggest critiques made by enemies of Christianity in the early days. They'd say it's this silly religion made up of women and slaves and the uneducated, as if that were a bad thing. And people like Gregory of Nyssa were calling for the abolition of slavery in like the 300s. So that's pretty sick, in the good way. And the modern Western world would really take for granted the idea of like equality and dignity, and that we should give that to every person, regardless of race or creed or social status or anything like that. Basically, all the world operated through a type of explicit caste system before Christianity, and we of course still have that to some degree in practice, but in theory most Westerners hate the idea of discrimination based on immutable traits. Just a couple more things, but the way Jesus and his disciples challenged empires is also pretty inspiring. Like not bending the knee to the evil, egotistical king is like the plot line of every epic movie, because Christians were being executed by the droves, basically for saying, I'm not going to pledge allegiance to Caesar because there's only one God and we're all his children and none of us are better than each other. And last but not least, it's also worth noting that Jesus was just kind of a badass. Like there's no denying that he was way ahead of the curve in his time and the way he treated people. The famous story of the woman caught in adultery that the Pharisees were about to stone, and he bends down just quietly, is drawing in the sand for a bit, and then he says, he who is without sin can throw the first stone. And commentaries suggest he was writing the names of people the Pharisees had committed adultery with in the sand, and so that's just one of the sickest mic drop moments ever. And yeah, I know all the skeptic stuff of that story's not included in the earliest manuscripts and all that, but it's like totally in line with all that we know about Jesus, and the overall spirit of that story has been so ingrained in Christianity in a way that's just totally changed the world. I have a lot of bones to pick with the church and Christianity and all that, but I don't have all that much against Jesus himself. Like, I'm not at all absolving the global church for its crimes over the centuries, but I think the church is often viewed with an overly cynical eye that doesn't give enough credit for how much good the church has done in the world, building hospitals and soup kitchens and relieving poverty and teaching people to love their enemies, even though the church hasn't always lived up to those ideals. But this is a clip from my story on why Christianity and atheism didn't work out for me. So if you want to watch the full video, you can click on the link here.